Welcome in, Eagles fans. Welcome in, Birds 365 fans. A Wednesday edition of Birds 365 here today. We got a good show planned for you. Two good guests coming up on the show. Mike Gill in hour one, Brandon Leak out in BLG in hour number two. Johnny Mac, how you doing on this Wednesday morning?
Doing well. Yeah. Thanks to Howard Eskin for handing the baton. Thanks, King. But yeah, good. I hope everybody's enjoying their off-season Wednesday.
Hope everybody's staying cool. It is a hot
heat
week.
wave. Heat
depending
wave.
Depending where you
It's called
are.
summer, when you're my age. Yeah, it's called summer, which is not a bad thing.
Yeah, we'll go We'll go right to it, though, Johnny Mac. Here's Twiz the Jigga. John, is there any validity to what Eskin is saying? Do we have another Wentz situation?
Well, it depends your definition of validity. From what I heard, and I didn't hear it, so correct me if I'm wrong, Xander, but from what I read, Howard said Carson Wentzing Jalen Hurts, essentially turning into a term to explain what might be going on. And I just said right up, the Eagles didn't Carson Wentz. I mean, people forget the history of it. They had the terrible season. They moved on from Doug. They had the fractured relationship because, Doug benched Carson. Eagles still were working towards running it back with Carson Wentz. When they were interviewing head coaches, Nick Sirianni, Kellen Moore among their interview candidates, both of them, a lot of the questions were about how you're going to fix Carson Wentz. And then it became clear as time moved on that Carson wanted out. He thought the organization, really dating back to the draft pick of Jalen Hurts in the second round, kind of did him dirty, and didn't want to be here, and kind of forced the issue to the point where the Eagles were like, all right, we got to move on and we got to go in a different direction. So I don't even think the term Carson Wentzing is accurate to describe what the Eagles did to Carson Wentz. So will they do it to Jalen Hurts? No. From the standpoint of you better play better. That's everybody. And anybody could turn in a negative direction in this league. The contract helps. It's very unlikely, even if the Eagles have a poor season, that they're going to move on this quickly from Jalen Hurts. But the more you play to a lesser standard, the more questions there become. And you can see the questions popping up coming off last season. There's more questions. So, again, it depends on your definition. But the Eagles didn't Carson Wentz, so they're not going to Carson Wentz.
Let's redefine what that means. I mean, Carson Wentzing somebody. I know the
Eagles.
Well,
what's the definition of that?
Yeah, well, I know the Eagles didn't Carson Wentz, but for the sake of the conversation, moving on from a quarterback, taking on a huge.
Well, they could do that, yes, and that's what I said. It's about the definition,
right?
But from my take, and maybe other people had a different take. When I read that, the assumption is, well, the Eagles, Carson Wentz, and it was from their perspective of, oh, they were going to move on no matter what, and it's the exact opposite. They tried, they were going to run it back for one more year, and then if it went poorly, obviously they would have moved on, no question about it. You can move on from any player in the NFL. The minute you think you've got, my old favorite Roddy Piper as a wrestling guy promo is, just when you think you got all the answers, they change the questions. Defensive coordinators in the NFL. I went through it with Dante Culpepper. I saw it with Carson Wentz. The minute you think you saw, they're going to make adjustments and they're going to make you look bad. You got to keep evolving. So if Carson Wentz, took that approach, and I don't think he did, but I'm saying Jalen Hurts, I'm sorry. And he continues a downward trajectory and he doesn't adapt. Yeah, they can move on. If that's your definition, they can move on from any player. We've seen that. It's easy. What the Eagles proved at that time, and now it looks quaint, but the dead money they took at the time to move on from Carson Wentz was shattered the NFL record. It destroyed it. It set a new standard. Now, again, it looks quaint. So Jeffrey Lurie's already proven he'll take on the dead money if they decide, all right, this player isn't cutting it any longer. That part, again, it all depends on how you perform on the field. And if he performs like very poorly on the field, of course they can move on. Is that going to happen? I don't think so. I don't see any evidence of that. But it's certainly, that part of it's certainly positive.
Yeah, I mean the dead cap hits numbers. Oh, am I muted? No, the dead cap hit numbers are pretty huge, Johnny Mac. I mean, right now they're listed for. I'm on SpotTrack.com. If you look at 2024, 120 million dead cap, and then it says 107 million.
Well, they're not moving on from him this year. Is that the assumption? I mean,
no, I'm saying after the year. So if you move, I mean, if he struggles, I'm not saying they're going to do this, and everybody's going to be like, "Well, we're talking about
2026 would be the
Eskin
year.
stuff.
2026 would be the year, if he continues to perform poorly. Even if he performs poorly this season, they're going to run it back next season because of that dead cap hit, which is still well over 100 million at that time. In 2026, I think it dips to 50 something million, which sounds outrageous, but again, if you look at the way it's moved from when they did it with Carson, if he performs poorly over that time frame, 2026, it would be in the conversation. But he'd have to perform very, very poorly. And I don't think he performed very, very poorly last year. So I don't see any evidence of that happening. I don't know why anybody would be worried about it. But that's not how I took Carson Wentz. I took it as, well, the Eagles are moving on because he didn't play well, which he didn't play well. He got benched, and rightfully so. But that's not the reason the Eagles moved on. They wanted to move forward with Carson Wentz, and he made it clear that he didn't want to be part of the organization. So, can that happen with Jalen Hurts? Sure.
How bad would it
with anybody?
How bad would it have to be? I mean,
well,
it looks like if you had a terrible season, let's just walk through the scenario. If he had a terrible season, it looks like the only way that the Eagles would move on from him in a viable manner would be a post 6-1 trade where you take on 32 million of dead cap in 26 and you save 9.3 million in 2025. Now there's going to be more hits and stuff, and we'll see how it all shakes out, but I don't see them doing this at all. I think the scapegoat this year is set up to not be Jalen Hurts. It's set up to be the coaching staff. It's set up to be Nick Sirianni. So if it all goes to shit this year, even if Jalen Hurts stinks out loud, they're going to move on from the coach. They're going to bring in a new coach, and they're going to reestablish a new regime. Maybe that regime won't like Jalen Hurts, and that will be the start of the end. But I don't think they're moving on from Jalen Hurts.
They're not. There's always stages to any bad situation. And you're right. I mentioned it last year. The scapegoats were there was a layer between Nick Sirianni and the scapegoats, and now that's gone. So now it's Nick Sirianni. If Nick Sirianni's gone, then it's probably then the clock is going to start on Jalen Hurts, but it's not even that year. And there's the possibility of trades and somebody else buying in, as you mentioned. But the bigger impact would be if you want to do the Carson Wentz, you remember all the offensive line issues and all that crap and having the terrible season. If Jalen Hurts, if you want to carbon copy that, say, well, Lane Johnson gets hurt and Landon Dickerson gets hurt, and Jordan, and you got a bunch of poor offensive linemen, and the season gets away from you, and it gets so bad that the final month of the season you bench Jalen Hurts for Kenny Pickett. I don't like the odds of that happening. But I guess people, to use Howard's own If you're scared of that, get a dog. You know, I mean, you can't live your life like that. Oh, if this guy gets injured and this guy gets injured and this guy and he plays poorly and you bench him, I mean, come on, is that Carson Wentz'ing? No, it's not going to happen.
Johnny Mac says no chance. I'm kind of with Johnny Mac on this. I just do not see it. Look, I mean, I want Jalen Hurts to be better. I'm not happy with the turnovers last year and all those things, but he's the quarterback in Philadelphia, and he's going to be for the foreseeable future. I do not see them making a move from him anytime soon, even in the next, I would say, 2 or 3 years. Maybe if you want to start talking about 28, 29, if he doesn't live up to it, we can start talking about it. But I don't see it at all. I want to welcome, excuse me. I want to welcome everybody in this morning. Screwface, Mr. Perez, what's up, buddy? Mark Holmes, James Carver, Philly Birds and Beers, Cody K, Daz. What's up, everybody? Robert, we South Jersey D. So we appreciate everybody being here this morning. Mark Holmes says, why has there been so much negativity around this team recently, John? The weird part is everybody gets mad at the media, gets mad at us. I don't even think it's us right now. I really don't. I think the team has shown that there are still some kinks in the armor from last year. There are still some cracks. There are still some salt in the wound, if you will. And I don't want to make too much of it, but it's tough to not talk about it. I mean, there was a lot of problems down the stretch last year. There was a team that wasn't playing for one another. There was a team that wasn't communicating properly. Now we're starting to see it seems like it's still there. Jalen Hurts and Nick Sirianni stuff. I mean, I don't want to make too much of it, like I said, but it's tough to just brush it to the side after what happened at the end of last season.
No, well, you know, it's a pet peeve of mine because the media, you know, I'm a part of the media. So, I mean, it drives me insane when, you know, we don't have meetings. How many times I tell you, we don't meet every Thursday to talk about, hey, how are we going to take down your favorite team?
Right.
So, you know, if you're mad at Howard, be mad at Howard, whatever. She was asked a question. He said what he said, or I don't even know. But it's one individual. And then Xander asked me the question. I answered the question. That's all I can do. It's not going to happen. I don't even know what Carson Wentz'ing means. If it means what I think it means, they didn't even Carson Wentz. So I don't even understand what that means. But from the standpoint again, and when we talked about the press conference and people saying we're making more of it, we didn't do that. It was a layup. And people in the Eagles organization, key figures in the Eagles organization, were disappointed per Jeff McClain. And as I said, why wouldn't they be? Why wouldn't they be?
Do you
when
think
you're paying the guy, what's that?
Do you think the Eagles wanted to get that out there? That key people in the organization were disappointed?
No, because to me, and you know, I got the needless speculation. It creates needless speculation quote from a separate team source. It's common sense. Like what are you going to spin?
Well, it's one thing if everybody in the media, if everybody and there we go. I used the thing that's a pet peeve of yours, but all of us, anybody on YouTube, anybody writing articles, all those people are reacting to the Jalen Hurts comment, right? But if you put it out there that the team is upset, now Jalen has to be like, okay, I said something wrong. Now they could have that conversation behind closed doors, but if it's just us making a big deal of it, then that's all it is, right? They never have to.
Well, and that's why you know, there's
us being the crazy media like we are. But when you put out the team sources, when you put out key figures, now it's like, okay, it's not just John and Xander on Birds 365. It's not just Mike Gill on 97.3 ESPN. It's not just Brandon Lee Gouton on Bleeding Green Nation. It's Jeffrey Lurie and Howie Roseman. That's where I think it got deeper.
Well, and that's where you got to be, you know, as a fan, if you want to be. It's also, you know, you and I talked about that a little bit off air. If you know, and I talk about it all the time. If you want the cheerleaders, you can be the cheerleaders. Understand who you're listening to. You know, Jeff is a reporter. Jep talks to people in the organization. I'm a reporter. I talk to people in the organization. I do both, and sometimes it's difficult. That's Jep's job. If you're talking about some talking head who never sets foot in the building, you can like it, you can dislike it, you can do whatever you want. It's up to you as a consumer. Just understand where the information is coming from. Jeff's information is credible. It's his job to ask people those questions.
Yeah, well
It's
said.
credible.
I'm a talking head, like Johnny Mac said. I don't go to the Novacare complex. I sit here and ask John what I think he thinks on certain things, and I give an opinion as well as John. Like he said, it's tough to bridge the gap at some point, at sometimes, to be a reporter and then to give an opinion and separate the two. But, you know, that's what I am. Now, I want to ask Johnny Mac about, shoot, I just lost my train of thought on it. Sorry. Let me see if I can. Forgot what I was about to ask you there, Johnny. Sorry, I had a mental lapse. We have Mike Gill coming up, so we'll ask him about these things in a second. So we'll talk to Mike Gill. But, you know, anyway, I have the opinion on it. I think they've given us reason to have opinions on it, and I don't think it's a good thing that this has all happened. So I don't think it's a good thing the way Jalen answered the question. What do you think of, you know, Thomas Mott said something yesterday, and Stafford Beasley says it. You know, I don't see much wrong with what Jalen said. He answered the question how Jalen answers questions. Now, we had Angelo Cataldi on with Dan Cilio a couple days ago, who is obviously the king of talking heads, right? He is not a reporter. He's one of the biggest talking heads guys.
Ironically, he was once a hell of a reporter.
He was before he was a talking head, but he is no longer a reporter. Yeah.
No.
Now, he says, I absolutely love what Jalen Hurts said. He gave us truth. He told us that Nick Sirianni is the clown that we all think he is, and he didn't want to sugarcoat it and be a liar, and he spoke his truth, and we should all be praising him for that. So I guess that's the other perspective, is that, you know, you love what Jalen Hurts said because you're not a Nick Sirianni guy.
He didn't say anything. So, you know, he wasn't
speaking his truth.
Yeah, he wasn't speaking his truth. He didn't say anything. And it's his right. I'm not saying it's not his right, but he didn't disparage Nick Sirianni. He just didn't say anything. To a softball question, that was easy. But where I take exception, and I did it with Thomas yesterday, I do it with Angelo now. Jalen answers questions when he wants to answer questions. And he answered a question in that very press conference from me. And he went on for an extended period of time because he wanted that information out there. 95% new offense, 95%. This is essentially why we're struggling in the spring. We're learning a completely new offense from the standpoint of what it was before. And that is some of the context. And by the way, correct context and valid context and meaningful context as well. It shouldn't be a surprise that there's some growing pains, and there will continue to be some growing pains. That's not the end of the world. He does answer questions when he wants to answer questions. Typically, yes, he's very guarded. He's very close to the best. But, you know, it's like Bill Belichick. People that covered Bill Belichick for years say he wouldn't answer anything. But then if you get him on a history topic, he might go on for 15 minutes about long snappers. Jalen answers questions on occasion. So just to wrap it up, as he never says anything, is incorrect.
Mr. Perez says, Xander, what's the big deal about how he answered questions? Ironically, Perez, I don't think it is about how he answered the questions. I think when you couple the response with what happened at the end of last year, it is fair to wonder if the problems that made the team collapse in 23 are still prominent in the organization today. And that could be a look at what might go wrong with the Eagles this year. I don't think it's a problem. I don't have a problem with how Jalen answered the question, but our job is to make sense of what he said. And he said something that created headlines. The headlines are not great. They look like there could be still problems in the organization. I think that's what matters. I don't think how Jalen answered the question is what's important. I think Is it a glimpse into the problems behind the curtains of the Eagles organization? We will find out when the season begins, just 79 days away, under 80 now. So we are moving right along. The season's going to be here before we know it. So stay tuned, everybody. Hang in there. I know it's tough. I know we're in the off-season days, but we will get there. Mike Gill coming up next on Birds 365. So stay tuned, everybody. I appreciate you all being here in the chat. Darlene and Richard, Jason A-Team, Screwface, Yale, Underdog. Everybody's still pissed that we're still talking about this. But look, there's Eskin kept the train rolling, and now we're going to keep going with it. Let's get to our commercial break.
It's our fault.
Make sure you guys drop a like on the show. I know you're enjoying the episode, so we appreciate you guys being here as always. And Mike Gill is coming up next on Birds 365.
If you missed any of today's show on the JAKIB Media channel, listen to the podcast on your way home. Available on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify.